That's embarrassing, where he looks when I walk.
So I'm gonna just want to go.
Hi, Jen.
We were looking at Buck, don't worry.
Sarah, we are hungry.
All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is Erda City Council. Today is Thursday, October 26th, 2023 at 7 p.m. We're in the Tooele County Auditorium. Located at 47 South Main Street, Tooele, Utah. This meeting is being held also on Google Meet and also over YouTube. Start with a roll call. Scott Newbay
is here.
Craig Smith.
Here.
Jess Bird is here.
Martin.
Here.
And Terry Miner.
Here.
We're all in attendance tonight. We also have our clerk reporter, Jen Poole, and our counsel, John Brems, with us tonight. We will now go to wait for that. I forgot. I think it's probably my turn.
Yeah. Had to, but
Repeat after me.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
All right, we open the meeting up to public comment.
Daryl Anderson, I live in Stansbury Park, I guess. I hope I can make this clear, and I hope I can make it short. But I'm glad that John's here because we're going to need his input on this. It seems like one of the things that we get to do is try to deal with Tooele County land use ordinances. And that's what I'm here to kind of touch base with you on, and that's Chapter 31. So Chapter 31 is the PC zone. So it's the ordinance that Ochre Point was approved under and the one that it'll obviously go through the process under. And we've come up against either an issue or a decision point. I'm not sure exactly how to frame it. But in Chapter 31, to take Ochre Point through the process, there's various kind of steps that you go through. The first step was obviously to get the rezone. That was done by Tooele County years ago. And at that point, there was a master development agreement that was, developed, agreed, and signed, and one that you guys have obviously worked with us on a number of times. And then the next step in the process after that is what's called a community structure plan. It's a piece of the overall project. You can just kind of take whatever chunk you want, but you take a piece of the entire project and do what's called a community structure plan for that area. And in that community structure plan, really what you do is you kind of say, here's where the roads are going. Here's where the sewer's going. Here's what the houses are going to look like. Here's what the setbacks are going to be. What are setbacks on the buildings? Here's who's going to take care of, this portion of the green space. You kind of just take that first step or that first level of laying out the project. We have done that for the first chunk. It's kind of the stuff that's, I just say, let's put it, the stuff that's west of Scott's Farm. Kind of north of 33rd Parkway, but really just everything that's west of Scott's Farm. It's about 160 acres. And this is the community structure plan that's been developed by SOMAS for us. It's 60 pages, and it just lays all of that out. Rochelle, in looking at Chapter 31, has pointed out to me, and I was aware of it, but I hadn't processed it like Rochelle did, pointed out that Chapter 31 says that for each community structure plan, you need a development agreement. Okay, and then I should say the next step after community structure plan in the process is what Chapter 31 calls project plan / subdivision. And it says that for the project plan / subdivision, you also need a development agreement. And Rochelle's suggestion or her interpretation of the ordinance is that that's a new development agreement for each of those steps. My concern is that if we go with that interpretation, we could literally end up with 10 to 12 or maybe even more development agreements for Ochre Point. And I'm concerned that that's just going to make a mess. And this is how I come up with that number, is we already have a master development agreement with 2 amendments that we've already done. Now, if we go to the community structure plan phase, this would be the first one for that 160 acres, and I'm sure we'll have 2 or 3 more to cover the entire 360. So there's 2 or 3 more development agreements. And then at that next phase that I was just referencing, where you go to project plan, you take these and break them down into smaller chunks and actually do your subdivisions, if that makes sense. And you need a development agreement under Rochelle's interpretation for each one of those. So this one has about 888 residential units in here. Well, my thought is you probably end up breaking that down into maybe 4 200 lot subdivisions or something like that. So that's another 4 development agreements. So now we have our original one. We would have this one and probably 4 more. So we're up to 6 development agreements for that 160 acres. I don't think that makes sense. I think it's just going to turn into a mess. And so here's my suggestion, is this 60-page document developed by SOMAS lays out everything that we need to at the community structure plan level. So I have another version of this where I just had SOMAS type right here in this little space here, development agreement first phase, or phase 1, development agreement for phase 1. And so what I'm suggesting is that this document actually is our development agreement. It's our community structure plan and our development agreement. I think that just keeps it cleaner. We have the master development agreement that does all the legal stuff that it currently does, and then we would end up with 2 or 3 of these that lay out all of the community structure plan stuff. Where does the roads go? What do the houses look like? What's your setback? All of that, we have a community structure plan for those. We'll probably have 3 or so of those. And then when we go to the project plan / subdivision step, we do the same thing. The project plan and the subdivisions ticks that box for a development agreement. I just think it's cleaner. I think it's easier. We need to make sure that the attorneys are comfortable with it. My concern, and hopefully John will understand what I'm saying here, is my concern is that if we take this 60-page document and we give it to the 2 attorneys, this document probably becomes 80 pages. I don't know what it is of legal, trying to legalese interpret what this is saying. And I just think it's maybe overkill, if that makes sense. So we just kind of need to get a little direction from the city, see if what I'm suggesting might work as far as John is concerned, if Rochelle can be comfortable with it. We would like to get this on the next planning and zoning agenda. It's the only item that we're missing now is how we're going to handle a development agreement question or that tick that box in chapter 31. So we'd like to really kind of get an answer pretty quickly so we can either move forward with my suggestion, or if we need to have an attorney take this and try to turn this into a text development agreement, we'll do that. We'll do whatever the city wants, but we want to get going as fast as we possibly can. So does that make sense? Okay. Any questions before I go?
Do you happen to know why Chapter 31 requires a development agreement with each step like that?
Well, I think it's just an error. Does that make sense? Remember, Chapter 31, there has never been a community that's gone through the Chapter 31 process. There's only been 3 communities that were approved under Chapter 31, and that was the temple, the ground around the temple, Adobe Ranch, which both were eliminated through the referendum process, and then Ochre Point. So Ochre Point will be the first and only development that's gone through Chapter 31. And I think that no one, because of that, no one's got to this level of detail. And so I just think that when they wrote Chapter 31, I don't know if they grabbed it from some other cities or ordinances and tried to mismatch a couple of things together. It's typically, I think, how ordinances get written. That it just ended up in there in that wording, and I don't think it's how it's written. I don't think is really what the intent was, or does it make, or nor does it make logical sense. Does that answer your question or not?
I think so. I was trying to see if we can see any logical reason why you have a development agreement after a development agreement after a development agreement.
I can't, and I think now that I think about it, there's a little bit an interesting thing in the wording, because what it says in there is it says you'll do this document, and then it says, and a development agreement to codify the structure plan. And so how I would interpret, I'll let John tell us the legal thing, is basically what they're saying is this a document to, to kind of make this permanent or whatever. My thought is if we just call this the development agreement, it does the same thing. Everybody knows that, hey, when we're ready to go in and figure out what a house looks like, we go here. When we want to know where the streets are, we go here. When we want to know where the setbacks are, we go here. As versus, we'll still have to have this, but now we're going to have a whole other document. And you're going to have both of them. I just don't think it works.
I got a couple of questions, and mostly maybe for John. Have you had a chance to look at chapter 31 and see?
I didn't know this was an issue until you stood up.
Okay,
No one's talked to me about it.
I don't think we'll be able to give you any answers today because obviously,
To talk to her to see what she.
And we want to know Rochelle's.
yeah,
Opinion.
and we can do that. So we'll have John look at chapter 31. Just off the cuff, is there any reason that the community structure plan can't also be the development agreement?
Well, I was just thinking maybe that's have a short development agreement, that's an exhibit.
Does
Like
that
a
go
one
along
or two
with-
pages.
So the only possible reason I see for this is the community structure plan would only go through planning and zoning. If it was also tied to a development agreement, it would have to come back to us.
Right.
Well, so
Does the new state law even allow?
Well, the state law allows an administrative development to the planning commission. So I have to start thinking about why they did it, and on the couple questions on the temple one, did they go through that process?
they never got to this point.
No,
Never got that far.
there's been Skywalk, the temple, this one, Adobe Rock. This is the only one that's ever, Skywalk hasn't moved forward yet. They may with us, they may go to Grantsville. We don't know yet, but, yeah, this is the first one that's ever moved forward.
That's been set.
That wasn't done under chapter 31.
Okay.
So I think we should be able to come up with an answer for it in a timely manner. And I don't know why that couldn't be a one-page development agreement with the exhibit that outlines everything.
And that would be perfect too. I mean, we'll do whatever. I just kind of want it to make sense and be logical / workable going forward,
But
know.
the development agreement made that finding, that's probably what it happened.
And that makes sense for sure. And I had thought about that. And the only thing I was hoping is maybe the fact that this is, approved in a public meeting, all of that type of stuff would bind it, but maybe putting a few page or a 1 or 2 page development agreement above it and saying the same thing would be great. And we can turn around a 2-3 page development agreement instantly. A 60-80 page development agreement, that's been, going back and forth the attorneys, that gets long problematic in my mind.
I like John's idea of short development agreement. That is the exhibit that outlines what it is.
And
It's also binding.
yeah, but it's,
Yeah.
and that'd be great. So if I'll work with Rochelle and you guys, and if we can get an answer really quick, in the next short while, whatever that means, few days hopefully, but then we will go that route and get it back to you. One other quick thing that just came up, that we have another question that we've got to get an answer from the city. So in chapter 31, where it talks about community structure plan, it's like 31.7 or whatever it is. There's about 6 or 10 paragraphs there. When you read those, it only references the Planning and Zoning Commission. Okay? So that would indicate to me that this only goes to Planning and Zoning. But earlier in the chapter, in that ordinance, you go up, there's a little table up there. And when you look in the table, it seems to indicate that it goes to planning and zoning and then to city council. And so I just need some clarification from the city on what's correct. Is it the wording down there that this is a administrative approval by planning and zoning? Or does that little table up there indicate that it goes to city council also? And so we'll need an answer on that.
Michelle made a comment on that. Have you asked her?
So I had a conversation with Rochelle about it, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but my interpretation is that she thinks it probably goes to city council. But I'm not trying to imply that that was a final answer from her, but that's the direction that I felt she was leaning at that time. I will make one other quick thing and then I'll sit down. We actually we got a community structure plan approved through Tooele County. It's a really small one, only had one residential lot, and we had no development agreement for that one. I granted it was much smaller, and so maybe that's why the county was fine to go that route, but there's no development agreement for the first community structure plan, and it did go, if I remember right, to the county council, but I may be wrong on that, but I think it did. Craig, you're wondering if maybe it didn't.
I don't know if it did. I know it went through the planning and zoning, but I don't know if it went to
I think
the,
it might have, but maybe it didn't. I can't remember, so. All right, any other questions? I know I've taken enough of your time.
Can I just gaze at that?
Absolutely. You can have it. Pass it around. It's 60 pages. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So you're gonna have Brent work.
Yes, Brent will do it for us.
I'll call him.
Okay. I haven't given him a heads up on this. I'll call him also, so he knows when you call.
Any hands raised online, Jen?
Nope.
well, I'll move that we close the public comment then.
Second.
Moved and second that we close public comment. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Chair moves that we approve meeting minutes from September 28th, 2023.
Second.
All right. Any comments or discussion? All right. Been moved and seconded that we approve these minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, sheriff's report.
Travis? Thank you. You have any questions on the stats and all?
So when it says total details, that's the numbers you were called to.
That's the number of calls that we responded to, yes.
Whose truck got stolen?
I don't have the name in front of me, but it was off of Drew Bay Road.
And when it says vehicle was listed NCIC, what is that?
So that's the National Crime Identification Center. It's basically lists it as stolen nationwide, so any law enforcement agency that stops it, it'll pop up as stolen.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, we will turn the time over to Larsenet Company.
But
Oh,
fire department,
fire department.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Buck.
Don't forget me. Don't forget me. I don't have a fancy handout though.
I'm glad you're here, thank you.
So we had 15 EMS calls. 6 of those were at Bronzewood Circle.
How many?
6 of the 15. 2 outside fires, 3 car wrecks, 2 CO alarms, carbon monoxide. We did trunk or treats, chipper days, dumpster days, football games. We had first responder night at the drive-in theater. We had an open house. And come bring your kids to the fire station for trunk or treat.
When?
I think it's Halloween.
On Halloween, okay, great.
The truck, cars, and credit on Cimarron, I don't believe is going to get their water or the necessary items that they're going to need to pass, get their certificate of occupancy or their fire or pass fire inspection. They're continuing to operate currently. Just heads up for you guys.
What they need is a storage facility.
So according to state law, they cannot operate a car dealership out of a residential home. Even if they were to store their documents in their garage, it can't be in a residential residence.
You know what code that is?
It's state code. That's car dealership code. Has nothing to do with me.
You quoted it, so I assumed you checked it.
No, that's a report from them. Trying to help them overcome it. That's what she says. The lady from the car dealership says that they have to have a the state will not issue them a car dealership permit for a business license if it's in their residence. It's, like I said, not my code. So they have a shed, a Connex box that they're using as the business. It doesn't have a sprinkling system. It's not, there's nothing there. The way the code is written, it's 0 to 22,000 square feet, requires minimum fire flow. You have to be able to put out the fire that's there. Unfortunately, the code says 0 square feet to 22,000 square feet or 2,200 square feet. Even a small Connex box is greater than 0 square feet. So they would have to meet minimum fire flow. They cannot. Or you have to have a tank because there's no hydrants, nothing there. So you have to have a 180,000 gallon tank. It's reduced by 75% if it's sprinkled. The building is not going to be sprinkled, so they would need the full tank. I've told them to contact Tulla Valley Motorsports, which is across the street, who does have a tank already. They could get a written agreement with them to use their water. I believe that that's where the stop has come because they're Tulla Valley Motorsports for their right to say no, it's our water. If you want to pay us rent, I don't know why they made that decision, but there's not an agreement made. So they can't operate. So I will continue to see if we can find ways around the code, but the last message I sent Rochelle was that they're non-compliant. Anything else? Any other questions? The car dealership across the street is going to go in. It's going to be a West Auto Sales. Because the building is pre-existing non-conforming and has not changed occupancy type, they don't have to have. So, Marcosian has sold out to this West Auto Sales or whatever it is. So, unfortunately, I don't see any other way around it. Any other questions? Okay.
Thanks, Buck. All right, now we'll hear from Larson and Company.
You're all excited, huh?
Nice to see you again. Has it been a year already?
It has. And I apologize. It's actually late. It's not late yet. December's when it's due, but the audit's actually been done for over a month probably.
Feels like.
Terry and Dave do a really good job. So pat those guys on the back. Everything is really clean. I mean, our staff we can kind of just click through things and we don't have a lot of hang-ups. I was actually overseas working, so that's why we're a little bit late getting it finished up. I'll go over our opinion real quick. I won't spend a lot of time on the reports just because they haven't really changed over the year. We've finalized the audit for June 30th, 2023, and our opinion is an unmodified or an unqualified opinion. That's a clean opinion. Immediately after the audit report is the management's discussion analysis. So that contains a lot of comparative data. And the reason why it's there is typically in your financial statements, you're not going to see, in private financial statements, they'll typically show 2 years. So you can see, okay, this is what it was last year, this is what it is this year. Government statements aren't set up that way, so they have the management's discussion analysis. For you guys, I don't know if I'd spend a lot of time there this year because last year was kind of a beginning year, 6 months, a smaller year. I mean, you can see if you look at the comparative data, you can tell that this is a full year worth of operation. So that's going to be more to you in the future. Let's see. As far as your responsibilities for the financial statements, you're responsible for the financial records as well as the financial statements. We help prepare them, but ultimately Dave's going to sign off on them. He's going to review them and make sure that they tie back to his trial balance. That actually came up as they've kind of clarified our standards. So we get audited just like you guys get audited. All of our audits get audited by external firms. So we just had a firm in Florida that just went through all of the audits that we issue in our firm. And that was one of the things one of the hot topics that they talked about in government audits is just making sure that there's clear communication as to who's responsible for what, and then we don't impair our independence. If there are concerns about issues that arise that would prohibit you from continuing as a going concern or to continue to operate as a city within 12 months of the financial statement date, then you're required to disclose that to us. I know Terry's talked to me about, just a couple of ongoing things that are kind of seem to be, the decisions will probably be way into the future. But that's another responsibility that you have. Our responsibilities are we have to maintain professional skepticism. We have to use our professional judgment. We have to identify risk and assess that risk. We have to look at your internal controls, make sure that there's A, controls that are actually in place, and B, that they're functioning. You can implement all the controls you want, but if you're not going to follow them, they don't do you any good. And then we also look at any conditions or concerns that would prohibit you in our test work that come up that would prohibit you from continuing as a going concern. And then we do our own analysis. And just make sure that, you're aware of it. You have a plan of action, to hopefully overcome that. Let's see. I'll go through the rest of the reports real quick, and then there's a couple things I just wanted to talk to you guys about. The next report we're required to issue is just stating that we issue your audit in accordance with government auditing standards. There are differences between a private company or a nonprofit and what we do in a government audit. And so we issue a report. That report hasn't changed since last year, so I'm not going to go spend a lot of time on it. The next report is for the state auditor, so they require us to look at certain areas of compliance in Utah with Utah State Code. For the city this year, it was your budgetary compliance, making sure that you're within the fund balance limitations, any fees that you charge, restricted taxes, and then obviously the fraud risk assessment. So our opinion really is limited to these areas, but it's also an unmodified or an unqualified opinion. So nothing major happening. You're not, materially out of compliance with anything. I'm going to go through the rest of that. All right. So I'm going to skip to this other letter, and then I'll go back to the financial statements. Just a couple of things that we're required to communicate to you. And the reason why this is separate, and you'll have two separate PDF files of the electronic version, is this letter stays with you guys as a council. It doesn't, I mean, the public can see it. It's going to be, posted on the state auditor's website if you have any findings. But typically, this is just communication for you at the close of our audit. The plan, scope, and timing of our audit and the things that are contained in our audit, that's all outlined in the engagement letter. That's why we have you sign an engagement letter. Compliance with ethical requirements regarding independence. I talked a little bit about independence, but that responsibility doesn't lie with you guys. So Terry doesn't have to make sure that my firm stays independent. That's my responsibility as a partner. So that alleviates you guys of that responsibility. Significant risks. This is kind of a confusing thing. Our audits are all risk-based, so every area on your financial statement, so every line item gets assigned a risk. So if you have, let's say, capital assets, it's really hard to pick up a capital asset and steal it, right? You just talked about having somebody's truck get stolen. It's pretty hard to steal a truck without somebody noticing, right? So that typically has a lower risk inherently. Versus like cash has a higher risk because cash is easy to manipulate and it's also easy to misappropriate. So you have to have certain control. So we assess that at a higher risk, meaning we have to do more testing on cash than we would typically capital assets. And then we have overall risk just based on the nature that you're a government, you're dealing with public funds, you're a small city. Most of our governments have the same significant risks, and those are improper revenue recognition, cash disbursements, and then management's bias or journal entries. So we specifically address these risks in our test work. So we plan and perform specific tests addressing these issues. So these are not risks that you really have caused or you've done anything to really warrant these. It's just the nature of your entity, right? So in all of our tests that we performed, we didn't find any material misstatements that weren't corrected that we need to address. And that's really what we're looking for is based on our risk, these are areas that are susceptible to misstatements in the financial statements. And so we have to do additional testing to make sure that we identify any misstatements. Let's see, there weren't any difficulties in performing the audit. Like I said, everything was really, really clean, really good. Management representation letter, we get a representation letter signed by you guys as a city. It's kind of like our engagement letter to you. That's kind of a full disclosure letter back to us that you're open and honest with anything that we need to be made aware of. Typically what I find is if people are aware of fraud or if they're aware of litigation, they don't want to say anything about it. And then that communication doesn't come back to us. It's okay to have litigation. Every city is going to deal with litigation. What matters is if there's potential liability and it's not disclosed in the financial statements, then potentially you could have misstated financial statements. Because one of the risks that we look for in an audit is that you're not overstating your assets or understating your liabilities, right? You don't want to make yourself look better than you really are both ways. So we just get a letter signed by management. It's kind of an open and honest, like I said, full disclosure letter. Consultations with other accountants. If there's issues that come up, you're more than welcome to talk to other CPA firms and get their opinion. We just need to also be made aware that you're actually talking to somebody else so that we can communicate to them and present our understanding of the guidance or the law or whatever it is. And then we can move forward with the audit. All right, findings for this year. There weren't any internal control findings, and there weren't any state compliance findings. So a couple years in a row with no significant findings to warrant. Just remember, Dave kind of helps keep the book straight, but just be aware of what code is, be aware of, what the compliance issues are, and really my expectation is that you guys continue to have no findings. That would be great, right? To have no findings every year. All right, let me go back to the financial statements. I know you guys don't have a copy in front of you. But this has kind of come up with a couple of cities and a couple of counties and a couple of districts. I'm really glad that the public are paying attention to financial statements. but it's causing a lot of heartburn, and I think there's a lot of, people see smoke and they create a wildfire. There are certain statements in the financial statements that mean certain things and give certain information versus other statements. So in a government-wide or a government entity, there is the government-wide financial statements, and those are always the first two statements that are presented in your audit. So if you want to go look at the county audit or another city, the government-wide financial statements are presented like a traditional business where they're full accrual. So it shows all of your long-term assets and all of your long-term liabilities. And then immediately following the government-wide statements are your fund statements. Well, you guys operate on funds and you budget on the fund basis, with every fund. And that's on the modified accrual. So that does not show your capital assets or your long-term debt. Anything that's long-term does not belong in your fund statements. It's money in is revenue, money out is an expense. For Erda City, both of those statements are the same because you don't have any capital assets yet, and you don't have any debt. But as you do, those statements are going to start differing. And the government-wide statements are used more externally. So when you want to go issue debt and you're going to issue bonds, they're going to rate those bonds and they're going to look at your government-wide statements because they want to know, okay, what assets does Erda City have? And what liabilities do you have? What's your asset to equity ratio? What's your debt to equity ratio? So they're going to do ratios based off of financial statements that are presented like a normal traditional business. That is not where you need to get the information to operate your city. That's all going to come out of the fund statements. So if you look at the fund statements when you get time, you'll notice you have your general fund, which is your operating fund. That's where most everything is going to be combined, and all your revenues are broken down and all your expenses. This year you now have a capital projects fund. The reason for that capital projects fund is there is a limit how much you can keep in the general fund. The state code says that you can keep 35% of your current year revenue, and you can't go below 5%. So you got to be right in that window. Well, if you go above that 35%, then you really, it's either you're charging too much money in property taxes, so you should need to lower your taxes, or you need to adjust some things. You can't just accumulate a whole bunch of money in the general fund. Well, it's really hard for a city that's growing, or really even a large city like Tooele City. If you were to look at theirs, you can only maintain so much in the general fund, but if you want to grow in the future, you have to save money, and you have to be able to have enough funds available to build or to purchase equipment, in the future.
City Hall.
Yeah. So, i.e., that's where the capital projects fund comes in. So you can accumulate as many funds as you want in that capital projects fund as long as they're assigned to capital projects in the future. So there was a transfer that went into the capital projects, so that's kind of your now capital money that you can utilize in the future to either purchase equipment as you grow, or build a city hall, or whatever needs to be. So those two funds are where you want to look when you're looking at, okay, how is the city doing? Where are we spending our money? Where's our revenue coming from? Because the government-wide, they're going to have, eventually it's going to have adjustments that if you purchase equipment, it's going to show as an expense in your fund statements because you spent that money. But on the government-wide, we're going to pull those out of the expenses and put them up on the balance sheet and then depreciate them over time. Well, that doesn't really give a picture of what actual money was spent because you don't have a cash flow statement to kind of offset it. So you have to look at the fund statement. So just as clarification, if the public are looking at your financial statements, those are the statements that they need to spend their time looking at, because it kind of gives an actual picture of what's happening dollar-wise in the city. If you have any questions, happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple questions. As the capital assets, do you normally capitalize roads?
You can. So under the guidance, you can either capitalize roads and then depreciate them, or you can use the modified approach, where if you elect to use the modified approach, then you have to maintain a database that says the percent good, fair, or poor of all of your roads, and then you have to show how much you spent on improving the roads during the year. So there's a separate section in the financial statements that discloses that information. So there's two different options. You can either elect to just capitalize and depreciate, or you elect to use the modified approach.
Right, but those are options, we still have to capitalize.
Well, no, not under the modified approach. They're not capitalized.
So every city I work for capitalizes their roads, their sewer systems, their water.
Sewer systems, yes, all of that are in the proprietary funds. But roads and infrastructure, when GASB 34 came about, when we had the government-wide statements, now you have the option to say, okay, we're gonna capitalize the roads and infrastructure, or we're not capitalizing the roads and infrastructure and depreciating them.
Okay.
So it's really the option of the city when it gets to that point.
You never said
I think when I talked to Terry, there was only the one litigation of the city that wasn't material. So we're not required. Yeah, we're not required to send it if it's going to be immaterial.
That's just the one challenging the corporation, it's not material.
That was the budget one for that. That's what we talked about.
Yeah, and we had a long discussion about that. So but after our discussion, there wouldn't be any disclosure in the financial statements, and so that way we don't have to have you send us a letter.
Okay.
Save you a little time.
Do you think there should be one?
Just call. I've never had an auditor that has not asked.
Yeah, I know a lot of auditors will send them, but I recognize the time and effort is for you guys, and so if there's not material issues, we're not required to send it, and so I'll typically have my staff have a conversation about it, and I'll usually make the call to send it or not.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If there's any other questions that come up, happy to talk to you.
Safe travels.
All right, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Terry for our treasurer report.
Okay, it's gonna be kinda bigger than usual since we didn't have a meeting the first of the month, so this will be pretty much for the whole month. The deposits from, say, October 2nd to the 25th equaled $174,336.35 that went into checking. Now in that, $120,288.11 was a transfer to the PTIF account, from the PTIF account to the checking account. So actually, the actual net deposit was like $54,048.24. And now you'll understand why. Check number 1175 through 1188. We had the clerk salary for $943.68. Had accounting for $750. Had Twilla County roads for $42,655.11. Legal services $5,000. North Twilla Fire Department building permit fees $1,167.84. Dispatch $9,383.25. Sheriff's Department $77,644. For the planner $4,312.50. Aqua Engineering $838.75. State of Utah first quarter permit surcharge fee $120.95. CVE Tech Group for our Google $310.44. Ensign Engineering $9,583.75. Larson and Company Audit $10,300. Clerk salary for 9/30 to 10/13 $977.63. Payroll tax federal $443.66, which was an electronic transfer, and payroll tax state an electronic transfer of $53 for a total of $484.56. We also had two separate credit card bills. We had one for $29.40 for Walmart and office supplies and $66 for stamps. And that was $95.40, and that was paid on the 2nd October. And then we also had $8.82 for the monthly Microsoft, $21.39 for Adobe, and then $31.28 for per diem for the clerk training, which came to $61.49, and it was paid on the 21st of October. Has anybody got any questions?
Thank you, Terry. All right, next we have the proposed adoption of ordinance 2023-09 regarding compensation of clerk recorder. A couple of items here. I think we ought to open discussion amongst us to get some of the details out first, then open a public hearing, then close the hearing, have any further discussion, and then have a vote. And then I believe John wanted to make a statement on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the statute authorizes the municipal body, legislative body, to change compensation, but it requires notice. And it's a Class A notice under the statute. And so what was given was the agenda. That's not normally what I do for those types of notices. It went to the appropriate parties, but it wasn't the type of notice I would give. So just alerting you to the potential risk that the notice may have been defective.
Well, I got something that goes along with that too. I talked to the auditor, not the auditor, the accountant. And he said, since we're changing the salary, that changes the budget, and it would require a budget amendment before we could cover the raise in salary. Because it creates an encumbrance of the city that we don't have in the budget. If it goes by what they're doing, we only have it budgeted for 60,000. This would raise it to 62,000. The budget goes on a year, it doesn't matter if the position is part-time or whatever, it changes the total amount. So according to his opinion, and he's the subject matter expert more than I am, that it would require an amendment before we could approve it. Because we're like promising money that may not be there, because from now on to the end, if there's something that had to go full-time or something, we wouldn't. And it's not like a credit card. We can't say, well, we'll charge it now, and then if that happens, we'll pay it then. It's got to have the money like in a secured account. That has to be there just in case.
Okay, I'm not going to opine on what the accountant says.
He's the one that keeps us out of jail.
Well, I doubt you'd go to jail for that one, but
All right, I'll go ahead and read the ordinance as it's written. I just want to make sure everybody knows this is not written in stone. This is a proposed ordinance, and so it can be adjusted. I'll go ahead and get to the details here. Hourly wage of $30 an hour to take effect January 1st, 2023. So we'll be doing a retro, having it taking effect on January 1st of this year, which will result in a one-time payment equal to $10 an hour times 25 hours times 42.5 weeks, or $10,625 minus taxes. The purpose of this is to make the effective date of raise January 1st, 2023. And then a weekly hours allowance increase to 29 hours. And this would be for our clerk recorder position. And so I think what we ought to do is kick this around with the council, see where we get, then open a public hearing, close the public hearing, and then bring it back to us. What I would propose.
Well, first,
Unless anybody has any objections. Go ahead, Terry.
well, I got kind of some questions. It's like, what rating guide or job standard or even job description did you go by to come up with $30 an hour? That the position had been met or exceeded.
Anybody?
See, and this is what my point is. This is how I believe Jen deserves a raise, and I'm all for a raise. But the system and the way we went about it is completely out of whack. Because here's what usually happens. You have a job. She doesn't even have a job description. So how can she even tell if she's doing the job or not, if she doesn't have a description on what she's supposed to be doing? And there's nothing that says you have to spend like so many hours at this city hall, or do this or do that, or be in compliance. So usually what a job rating guide has, it'll have for like experience and performance is one, and then experience like with years of service. And then you'd have one that says like comply with all regulations. And then you'd have one with like ability to take direction and ability to work with the public. And then on each one of them, you would have instances of failure. So like on the compliant with regulation, you say 0, because that's not something that you're allowed to not do. And so like say for ability to take direction, say with less than 1 to 3 instances of failure. If you had that, then you met, and if you didn't, then you could exceed it. So if you have all 5 of these are put together, then you get like 3 or 4 out of the 5 that exceeded, then yeah, this is where your performance appraisal comes in. And then they have one that every 6 months, you come in and say, because the intent for the person is to exceed on the deal. So in 6 months, you bring that person in, and you say, okay, here's where you're at, here's where you stand. So it gives them a heads up on where to improve if needed, and so on and so forth. And then like in the positions when we first hired you, do the job standard, you say these are the same things like say the standards for the job. And then when a person applies for them, you figure out which ones are critical. Like say the compliance is critical, this one's critical, and the other 3 are not so critical. So then when you rate them, they're rated out as if you don't have any specialized field in the field, then you'd be like minimally qualified. And then if you had maybe 1 or 2, you'd be highly qualified. And then if you had like 4 out of the 5 or better, you'd be fully qualified. So all of these are steps and processes to help you evaluate the performance and the stuff, and it helps the employee as well, so they know what their job is and what's going on. So like I says, my thinking would have been, and that we wouldn't have to worry about changing the budget or doing anything of that, would be go ahead and go with the $5 an hour increase, which is 25% instead of the 10, which is a 50% increase. And what we're doing here, if you do the 50% increase, what you're actually doing is paying a full-time salary to a part-time job. Because when we first started out this job, it was like as of February 22nd, or 2022, the starting pay for a full-time clerk recorder was $45,785. And so by going with that $30 an hour, that would be paying that same amount on a part-time position. And I don't know if that's the wisest thing for taxpayer money to be paying a part-time job. And the reason I went from 30,000 that was in the budget last year to 60 this year was because of the pitch count. She's a part-time. So does anybody know what her average weekly hours is?
I assume it's to 25 max.
It's very close to 25.
Well, she's had like up to 58 is the high and 35 is the low. So the average is 24, but to be part-time, 29 is the target. So that didn't matter, because to be part-time, she could work up to the 58. which is the 29 a week. But see, like I says, at $30 an hour, that's like $1,200 a week. And so then what I'm going back to is saying, is do the $5 now, and then say we'll start every year after that, give a dollar. Because I talked to the accountant about that as well. He says that $20 for a starting is a standard wage, and then it usually goes by how many years in that job that you've had, the higher it goes. And so when I told him about the 25, he says, well, that's usually what a person that's had 5 years experience and not less than 2 years. Because all of us have less than 2 years experience in our current jobs and stuff. So he says that would be in line, so.
I'll give you my view of what you just said. I think her role is clearly defined. She is the clerk and the recorder for the city and does all of our clerical and recording work. There's no question she does. That's very much defined. And if you want to rate her skills, the only thing, if you went 1 to 10, the only thing I wouldn't give her a full 10 on is maybe years of service.
What I'm saying is that stuff should be written down so you could go right on there and put that instead of just saying,
Write it down.
instead of saying, I just like her, so I'm gonna pay her 50% increase. And
I've dealt with lots of different clerks in
how many employees?
different cities.
You're supposed to be as an employee or as a manager.
I have dealt with them in other cities and other positions, and I can tell you her skills with the public are outstanding.
How many employees have you managed?
How many employees have I managed? More than I care to think about. To be
You've paid their taxes and their FICA and all that type stuff and the payroll and
That has nothing to do with how good of quality work she's doing.
because you're saying she's also complies with, or because I told Jen before that this is more about the position and the process than her. I agree, she's an outstanding employee. We hit 100%, but 50% salary bump for the city to pay, I gotta be talking about that as a taxpayer and as a treasurer and as the finance.
I agree.
$5, we don't have to worry about the budget, we don't have to worry about all that other stuff.
We don't have to worry about the budget anyway.
Gotcha.
There's $60,000 there.
Well, it's
That would up it to, if she maxed out her time, 45,000 plus the
You're
back
still talking
for the 6
part-time.
months.
We still gotta do it.
I don't care if she's
We're doing
part-time or not.
We're
But you don't have to change the budget.
We're changing to $30 an hour, which is $62,000 a year. That's what the budget has to reflect.
62,000 a year
It's $30 an hour.
by 29 hours, by 52 weeks.
For a full year, at $30 an hour, is $62,000. We only
No, it's
budget
not.
for 60. There's 52 weeks in a pay deal. And at $30 an hour, that's $1,200 a week. Times that by 550.
No, that's not $1,200 a week.
52 times 20.
There's 40 hours in a week, right?
She's not gonna,
I'm
not
not
letting
talking
her
about
have
part-time,
40
I'm
hours a
talking
week.
about what's in the budget. We budget for a full-time.
in that budget, it doesn't say how many hours she works. It says how much money we have to pay her.
For a year.
Irregardless of how many hours. If we rolled her to full-time, we would have to adjust the budget.
That's where I go back to, we
No.
gotta have the money before then. So you're saying we'll just borrow the money now?
If
we'll put
we
the
were gonna
accountants
hire her
first,
full-time,
Then do it.
we would have to adjust the budget. We're not doing that.
Gotta have, what happens if we had to?
Then we would have to adjust the budget.
Again, so you're doing them backwards. You gotta have the money there first. You can't do it later.
No, we have to do it before the money in that pool runs
Oh,
out.
no. That's not what the accountant, but I guess you know better than he does, but.
I have dealt with a budget or two. But we are not putting her full-time. What we are doing here today, if we pass this as written, does not exceed $60,000, which is already in the
point I was
budget.
talking about was to go to, was the 60, was that to get her some help. Because if she exceeds, so right now, we're only talking about 1 more hour a week. So then if she's getting overworked or loaded, then another person, she could say, okay, well, can you do these things for me so I can kick back? And also.
She's not asking
And then also, if she's not here, we have somebody that can pick up and take over for her. And so she has a back. If she had to go somewhere or something happened or whatever, we'd have a plan B. We don't have a plan B right now.
No, we don't have a plan B for when she's not here yet.
So like I said,
Volunteers fill
all I
in
can
for
tell
us.
you is what the accountant told me and all that stuff. I know you guys will do what you want, so I'm done.
Can we get the accountant to give his opinion in a meeting?
Well,
Since I haven't
John's
heard
there, you
from
wanna
him.
ask him what he thinks?
Is it open? No, it's not. Not yet.
We
It will
will
be.
shortly, though.
Personally, I think, well, we didn't have a real good idea of what these two positions, and it is two jobs that Jen is working. I don't think we had a good idea of what was all required from day one. We were just getting started. And I think
Corey did a
Cast.
really good job.
yes, he did. I think we cast the net really low, and I think we caught a very lucky fish with that net. And while I do believe Jen has excelled in both positions, I also believe that these positions are quite demanding, with the phone basically being on all of the business hours. So whether or not she works 25 or 29 hours, the phone is still on. She could get that call anytime during the day, but it's not just daytime hours, it's nighttime as well, meetings like this. I do not believe 45,000 is out of line, and
Well, the clerks that work a year would disagree. If somebody can do it in part-time.
and I also, I'm not really considering the full-time argument, because in the ordinance itself has a cap on the amount of hours that's worked. So that's not part of what I'm thinking here.
But see, and my whole concern is the workload is gonna be increasing, it's not gonna be decreasing. So she's either gonna be working a bunch of hours for free, which is, I'm assuming, is kind of what the intent is of giving a full-time salary to a part-time position, is because she's not able to claim hours that are actually worked.
I don't believe that is happening right now, but I haven't heard either way.
As in the past.
But we are granting an increase of hours there, and I'll just echo the point that Craig made. It's Jen has not asked for any help.
And I also think we should all done this in a closed door and had this done before, and so Jennifer had it.
No, you never do this in a closed door. That's illegal. You can't do that.
Personnel, you can do it.
For personnel wages, no, you cannot.
For personnel performance, we're talking
For
performance.
conduct, you can.
And that's what I was.
But this is not that. This is what you pay for someone, and you do not do that behind closed doors.
This is performance-based.
It's personnel character, and that's not,
It's performance-based, however you want to spin it.
well, we've got an attorney right here. Let's ask his opinion. Would you talk?
I think it's sort of irrelevant. We're here in an open meeting, talking about these very sensitive things right in front of the person collecting these wages. And so I think we press onward and try to get this done as just as respectful and as efficient as we can.
You have any comments right now, Scott?
Yeah. So, one thing is I thought about this over time, that concerns me is this. Would we be setting a standard, that we can't back off of? Suppose, Jen, moves to, I don't know, where would you ever move to? Moves to Alpine by my brother in a big house, and we have to replace her. We're not gonna get somebody as good as Jen. And if we, and the first thing they're gonna say, isn't it, when they come in to interview for the job is, well, what have you been paying? And so I see that as maybe a trap for us. I'm constantly surprised at how well Jen does at her job, and where she learns all the things that she does. Right? It really surprises me. And you said it's not written in stone. I'm not opposed to $30 an hour. Terry and I talked about this a couple of days ago. As I do the math, though, who's got a calculator?
I got one.
My math says $30 an hour and 29 hours a week is 45 something.
45,240.
So
So you're doing the part-time deal. I don't know.
yeah.
Go by a full-time normal position.
So I think she's worth all of that. So I'm probably, I probably would support the $10 an hour. I probably would prefer 5 and 5 in a year. But if it means that we're not gonna pass anything, I'm gonna vote for the 10.
Just to be clear, are you talking about a $5 difference back to the first of the year?
Yeah,
and
just
then
take the
going
$10
forward?
out, put $5 in.
I see.
Yeah. I think we need to do something. And I would vote for the 10 before I would say, let's not do anything.
Okay.
Probably would prefer 5 now and 5 next year. Just because of that pigeonhole we might back ourselves into.
I agree with
You'd
that.
like to see it move up in stages.
Yeah, and
Don't think it's a bad idea with Terry's talking about getting some sort of written progression for employees type of deal ratings and years of experience at some point in the future. So if Jen does leave and someone else comes in, we can say, yeah, she did make this much because it is public record, but you're going to make a little less because you have less years of experience or you're new or whatever. Having some sort of written way we go about it, I think is not a bad idea.
I think that's a good idea, regardless of what we do. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, that's why I talked about a HR or personnel person in the last meeting, that
Yeah.
this is some of the stuff, if we're gonna be a real city, we need to develop, because all cities have performance appraisals and rating guides and stands for their people.
Well, you don't ever get a discrimination claim or anything like that. Why you telling me I don't make as much? No. Well, we have written programs or written steps we actually go through
Well,
in the
I
hiring process.
am certain that the city of Erda will do these things.
Yes, at some point.
We'll grow into it.
Mr.
I
Chair.
think we have a situation here that I think we can make better.
Mr. Chairman, I move we open the public hearing on this ordinance.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we open the public hearing on ordinance number 2023-09. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Public hearing is now open. Please.
Hi guys, Jason White. There's a couple things. Do I write down my name?
If you wouldn't mind.
Sorry. Do I do it after I talk?
Do it while you're talking.
Hey,
Two things. Two things. Job, what you do is not easy. I began in 1996 as the director of Stansbury Park Agency. Growth was difficult, and we had one employee. That was me. Okay? I'm going to offer some suggestions. When you discuss personnel and information about a personnel, you do it in a closed meeting, executive. Okay? The poor girl here, gal, or a man, should not be put through any kind of problem like this, any kind of discussion. That's my personal opinion, and that's what should happen. If the attorney says it has to be discussed here, I doubt it. Okay? You discuss it together, you all write up a job description, and guess what? You point one or the other to say, you're HR, you report to us. So you pick each other, raise your hand, assign someone. That comes up to that person, comes up to you guys. You discuss it without the poor person being here, and then that person can be the HR connection. Don't hurt them. Don't hurt people. I mean, we all have philosophies, right? But discussing that type of thing shouldn't have gone on. And that's really all I have to say is there's a time and a place. However, you guys do need microphones. Can't hear a blasted thing. Nobody. So if you can work on it, that'd be nice. And thanks. Can I write my address later?
Sorry, I know that I'm up here way too much, but just very quickly, I just wanted to give a small perspective. For the last number of years, I dealt with a lot of government employees in this valley, and there's many great ones. But I'll tell you, dealing with Jennifer has been one of the best. Her availability, her professionalism, her timeliness has been at the top of any that I've dealt with over these last number of years here in the valley. So I'm not going to comment on the money because I don't live in your city. It's not my taxes, but I just wanted to share from an outsider looking in. I've dealt with a lot of them, and you have a good one.
Yeah.
My name's Buck Peck. I'm going to use my personal hat as a citizen of Erda and also as an employee of the fire service. A couple comments that I'd like to make is the cost of living for the last couple of years has been significant. And in 2022, the fire department received a 10% COLA, and in 2023, we're also voting for another 10% COLA. So you can see that her salary is far behind where it should be. Also, 1 + 1 doesn't make 2. If you have 2 employees and you're trying to subdivide their salary, or you're trying to subdivide their tasks, you don't necessarily get a synergy. And oftentimes, if Jen is going to have to train somebody else to fill a role of tasks, you're going to get 1 + 1 = 1.5, maybe. Speaking as fire marshal, I deal with Jen on a weekly basis, maybe sometimes a daily basis, and I am very confident that she is doing both roles very well. If I were to give her a performance review, I'd give her a 10 out of 10. Even when I do something wrong, she doesn't berate me or belittle me, but corrects me and helps me do the things that I need to do. I see her interaction with the public. Again, top notch. She already has a job description. She filled that role of the job description, and she is exceeding the role of her job description. As regards to the public debate of her salary, unfortunately, being a public servant, my salary is also public and is voted upon just like hers is, and is discussed in open forum, and that's one of the disadvantages of having or advantage of being a public servant.
So what job description does she have? She has a written job description, you're saying?
Yes, when she applied for her job, you guys put out a job description and put it in the paper to tell her what the minimum requirements were, and she came in with it and had an interview and you talked about it and great, everything was great.
It wasn't a job description. It was the qualifications for a job.
What's the difference, sir? Anyway, it's a public comment and you don't have to answer, but that's exactly what it is.
And since he brought up COLA, I'll bring some COLA too, but
It's a public comment, sir.
I'm public too, right?
And if you want to come stand behind the podium, you can, sure.
Anyway, the civil service and social security and all that got a 3.2% increase for 2024.
I guess I'll take my turn. I'm Sheldon Birch. I currently directly or indirectly manage somewhere around 50 employees, probably quite a few hundred employees over the last 20 years or so. I am no expert in human resources by any means, but I've learned a few things that I think are important. So my opinion is that in the employment world, there are eagles and there are turkeys, and the eagles are worth keeping, and the turkeys I personally sometimes tend to hold on to them too long, and we need to be quicker to cut the turkeys out of our employment and reward the eagles. We're more productive that way overall. I think that one of the right ways to manage a position like this is to make sure that someone is paid enough that money is not the reason that you lose them, or that money is not the reason they look for something else. How much that requires in this situation is, of course, the discussion. A quick Google search can tell you what average city clerks make and what average city recorders make, and you've got someone who's doing both positions. And it looks like the two positions total is in the neighborhood of $50 or $60 an hour. So that's probably all I have to say about that. Thanks for giving me a minute to do it.
Sheldon?
Do we have any raised hands, Jen? I move we close the public hearing on this then.
Second.
Moving second, if we close public hearing, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
John, for future reference and in the future, can we look up the statute on whether we could do a closed meeting on personnel like this? I just,
I pull up statute, let me answer your question.
for the future.
So the statute allows you to go into a closed session to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. So every city I've been involved in when it comes to employee evaluations is taken basically by management, doesn't come on to a public meeting. But the amount you pay is a public issue and it is discussed in public.
Thank you, Phil. I can't think of anything else than this.
I think we can all agree Jen does an awesome job, more than she's asked.
No matter
Sure.
what happens, we're all very grateful. The thing about Jen is she has a remarkable ability to be a self-starter and a self-finisher. She takes personal responsibility for everything she does. But again, I said I had enough on that, so. All right, any further comments?
Well, I like what Scott come up with the $5 and then the $5, and then we won't have to worry about budgets or none of that other stuff. And she'll get it just a year later.
All right, I'll read that as a motion, second, to amend to $5.
Scott, how are you feeling about that still?
Same as I said.
I
I would I would prefer to stay out of that corner for another year. But we don't want to lose Jen no matter what we do.
Well, 5 was one of her recommendations as well.
Just for the record, this motion would essentially pay her $25 an hour from January 1 until now and $30 an hour moving forward.
Correct, that's how I read it.
The next budget year or whatever.
No, starting today.
Pretty,
$30 starting today.
because I did get doing the budget thing again. I'm trying to get away from the budget problem that we don't have to
We're gonna be well under 60,000.
again.
Well, I think we have at least 3 in support of adjusting this to 5. Any objections?
No.
And then, because of that, just a matter of calculation. Instead of a one-time payment of 10,625, we cut that in half, and that is going to be $5,312.50. Basically effective January 1st, 2023, the hourly wage would have been $25 an hour, calculated on 25 hours a week. The $5 difference comes to $5,312.50, which will be paid, assuming on the next pay period, and then going forward from today, $30 an hour raise.
Can I ask the auditor a question?
Not a
Since he's
$30 an
here.
hour raise, $30 total. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask the auditor a question while he's here?
Of course.
On that back pay thing, how would you even put that in as a,
Were you asking me?
yeah,
Say that again.
on the back pay? How would you put that, what qualifies or what regulatory, how would?
We're making
put that
a
in?
raise effective January.
Yeah, just salaries and wages. I mean, it's gonna get paid like regular payroll. She's gonna have more taxes taken out this, with that one-time check, because it's gonna assume that she's gonna make that every pay period, the entire year. So it's gonna be like getting a bonus. So, I mean, I'm sure you've all had bonuses before. You're like, why the hell are they taking so many taxes out? Well, it's not taking any more than regular. It's just, it assumes that because of the tax tables, that you're gonna make that every pay period. So she'll just have a little bit more taxes taken out. Medicare and Social Security is gonna be the same. It'll just be the withholding. But it'll just be salaries and wages. And then just clarification on the budget. Like both of you, I think we're talking about the same thing, just saying it a different way. So you need to amend the budget when you are going to exceed whatever budget you set before you exceed that budget. So black and white in the code says you cannot spend $1 if you haven't already budgeted for it. But that public hearing could be anytime between now and the end of the year, or, well, not the end of the year, but before you exceed that already set budget, before you spend the money. If you don't, then the code says whoever contracted that is now personally responsible for that, not the city itself. So you don't want to exceed your budget.
All right, anything else? I'm just gonna read this again.
Yep, make the motion.
Chair moves that we adopt ordinance number 2023-09. With the following edits. Hourly wage of $30 an hour to take effect. I'm sorry. The way we edited this. Needs some characters. Okay. Hourly wage of $25 an hour to take effect January 1, 2023, which will result in a one-time payment equal to $5 times 25 hours times 42.5 weeks, or $5,312.50 minus taxes. The purpose of this is to make the effective date of the raise January 1st, 2023. Now, beginning on October 26, 2023, hourly rate becoming $30 an hour. And point number 2, weekly hours allowance increased to 29 hours.
Second.
That'd be another back pay too, just so you know. Because he's already been paid for the first week in October, the first pay period in October.
Okay.
So it'd be cleaner if you just said November. Because she was on vacation this last November too, so there's not gonna be a lot left for October, that's what I'm saying.
We've got a motion to amend. Is there a second?
Craig seconded it.
I seconded the original motion.
No.
Terry wants to amend it.
Oh, sorry. I'll second it because you're saying it's gotta, we've already paid her once since the $30 an hour takes place.
No, the $30 an hour would take place today.
Oh.
She's already received pay for October, so.
He wants to make November 1st.
Yeah, well,
the
it'll just be the
effective
next pay period, which will be
Yeah,
the end of
Makes-
October to the 1st of
yeah,
November.
yeah, that makes sense. I'll second
date. Can I
that.
get one more hit on it? Beginning November 1st, 2023, hourly rate becoming $30 an hour. Will you second that?
Yes.
All right. Been moved and seconded. Is there any last discussion on this before we go to a vote? All right. Scott, how do you vote?
Yes.
Terry, how do you vote?
Yes, I'm 25 and I'm 30.
Craig?
Yes.
Cale?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Unanimous vote on this. Thank you, gentlemen. And Jen, thank you for putting up with us.
Yeah.
I love you guys. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in a public meeting, but
You are.
I really enjoy working with you.
Jennifer and I had a talk before tonight too, so she understood where I was coming from.
That's probably a good idea.
Good. We've got an item on here for railroad discussion. Is there somebody leading that?
I think we got a response. Give me a minute, I was not ready.
But what it is the environmental and wildlife and whatever for the railroad proposal to run from Burmester to the flats for Grantsville's industrial park has been completed. I know all of the residents down where I live got a card in the mail saying, here's what it is, and it's like 626 pages long.
Of course.
So we have until the 30th, I think it is, to respond to it.
As a city or as individuals?
As either way. I think John brought it up to be, I think, to decide what way as a city we want to approach this. But I don't know.
You want me?
If you're ready, John, if not,
Terry
we'll.
said basically it. So the Surface Transportation Board, the Office of Economic Analysis, issued a draft environmental assessment statement. Proposed construction for the operation of the new rail line in Twilla. The draft, basically responses, if you have a response to it, it's due October 30, 2023. If you want to respond, we need to respond, but I don't know what you want to say.
So is this an environmental impact study like they were doing on the road?
It's an environmental assessment. So what's the impact to the environment going to be?
gonna degrade the environment.
Well, what?
It's gonna degrade the environment.
Well, I wrote up a bunch of bullets for the people that this is actually really gonna affect, the ones that live in that subdivision type of thing.
I think they care more about the environment than they do actual people, Terry.
But, well, that's one of my bullets. Here it is, it says, says like residents of the subdivision that runs wish they received as much consideration to harm of their living environment as wildlife and environmental receive.
Good luck with that.
And then it was abandoned, and they're trying to, and nothing had ran since the 70s. So abandoned means, for washing my hands, and it's not the railroad that's trying to bring it back, it's a private company that sees dollar signs and says, well, I can run this, do this. And then and of course, I read 626 pages. Some of that stuff in there, that there was a statement that also concerns me, is it says that, and it was put in there by the health department. I don't know if anybody else read the deal, but it was like lead was found in soil south or north of Erda Way, according to the county health department letter that was attached in this study. They denied a subdivision down in that area because of lead in the soil. And my other deal also was that if they just put it on the east side of the Sheep Lane, they don't have to cross any roads, they don't have to go through any subdivision. They can hook right into the Twilla main line and not environmentally hurt nothing, nowhere, no how. And the residents down where I'm at, they're worried about what the vibration and stuff will do to the wells. Everybody's on their own private well and stuff like that. So,
And those wells are old.
yes. And one house, I know one, just like, remember we was talking about Langford's, for somehow it's considered a historical place. Well, there's the one house that's in there that's the roundhouse. I don't know if anybody drove by to see the roundhouse. It was built in 1961.
Yeah.
It's adjacent to the railroad. And so I put that type of thing in there too. So then it talks about mitigation and stuff like that, but for us that lived down that deal, they were promised mitigation for when they put the racetrack in too, but there was no remedy for enforcement or none of that. So once it was in, it was a done deal.
So Terry, what you're talking about here, is that our response that John is asking for? Or?
That's my response. So here's my, I don't know if you want to say request, or, well, you guys are the guiding force, so you tell me. Is it all right if at the end, besides putting a subdivision residence, that I go ahead and say Erda City Council in District 2? Because that's where this is.
Why don't you read that whole letter, and maybe we just put Erda City Council, period.
Do that.
Read that whole letter to us.
Well, it's not as much a letter as it is just a bunch of bullets.
Yeah, but we might be able to adopt that as our official.
What you do is direct Terry to add Erda City as a respondent.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll just read it and then you guys can tell me.
Yeah, that way we know exactly what it says.
Because I just got his railroad bullets, Service Transportation Board, docket number FD 36616. And at my very first line is request disapproval of abandonment rail line being resurrected by private company. And then it goes into the thing that says, I don't understand how a private company can use a right of way on an abandoned rail line that it was over 40 years since it's had anything run on it. And they've actually taken a lot of the rails out. And seeing originally when this was first done and the rail was taken out, that was given to the county to put in the roads. That's where you started seeing them roads that was supposed to go all the way from Twilla, like Middle Canyon, all the way down to Grantsville. Well, it made it as far as Sheep Lane and never went any further than that because the path and stuff goes right along the old railroad line and stuff.
That's the trails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it says, and they tore it all out from like Erda Way a ways down towards Sunny's and that, and then, of course, everything from the other side of the subdivision all the way to Twilla has been ripped out. Well, then, of course, you can go all the way up to Anaconda too. So, anyway. So then this is the other part I put is like the residents of the subdivision rail line runs through, wish they received as much consideration for the harm of their living environment as wildlife and environmental receiving. And then again, the thing about the train not running since the 70s, tracks removed, subdivision that meets historical requirements. They also didn't have hawks. They had talked about eagles and other things, but down around where I'm at and stuff, there's a bunch of red-tailed hawks and stuff that are nesting in the subdivision and stuff like that.
So Terry, make sure that will be something.
Is it in your bullet point, the red-tailed
That's
hawk?
what I just read.
Okay.
I think we could definitely use this as a format, send it to John, he can perfect it, and then we can approve of it. I think that would be maybe a good way of doing it.
Well, we got 4 days.
Yeah.
I don't want to meet again.
True.
Okay, keep reading.
That's the glory of an email.
And then I did the thing about, talked about the mitigating services that we've been offered that before, but there's been no remedy, so they should at least, if it has to go through, require sound walls and arms on the crossings, the railroad crossing arms, not just a sign deal. And then I also put in the thing about it's not the railroad that's doing it, it's a private company. And then here's another one, this might not go for some, it says, most people moved out in the country to get away from traffic and noise of being in a city and revel in the rural lifestyle. But now, since all the open space is in rural areas, surrounding cities want to move all the traffic and noise to the country that is jamming their streets. But their residents still have to have the impact on it, but the ones out in the country do. And they reap the financial benefits while the residents in the smaller cities must live with all the consequences.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
Me too.
I like Kel's idea. Let's give it to John, let him polish it, put any legal spin it needs on it.
I might even have a little more weight when it's turned into them by legal counsel from Erda City.
Legal counsel's not going to sign this one. So, I'm not sure what you want me to do. You want me to turn this into a letter? Some of the stuff is not environmental response.
I know.
It's more like, what about the children?
Yeah.
But don't you think that's a good thing to put in? Because we are part of the environment. I mean, we're not red-tailed hawks, but we're here and we've been here a long time and we're part of the environment.
I'll put it in there if you want.
I think just
He's just not going to sign.
polish it up, make sure we're not setting ourselves up for trouble is the main thing.
What's the response to an environmental assessment? You really say what you want to say.
Perfect.
That's good, and this way they'll understand that Erda City's not behind it.
Because in the first draft, they said there was no opposition in some of the meetings I'd been to when they first started this.
You have this in
They
Word?
apparently haven't been in my neighborhood.
Do you have an electronic?
That you can send to me, so I don't have to retype your stuff.
All right. Council representative reports.
I had one this morning, 3 hours, I'll never get back.
Oh, yeah.
It was on mass casualties. So we had a meeting in the training at the EOC. So it was all kind of like computer generated, but it was for mass care training. It was in the EOC training room. And so they broke down into groups and you had to like pretend like my deal was there was a bombing in a residential area and I was in charge of uniting family members after all the chaos and stuff. So then I went through, well, who would you need to contact, who responds, who does this, who does that. And then there's an organization called the VORAD, Voluntary Organization for Active Disasters. And so they're an organization that ties in a lot of other entities. They have like the food banks, the churches, Red Cross, and all these others, so that once something happens, you give them a call and they activate and go respond to it. And we're in Region 2. And then what they suggested was like, we as a city do like a table talk. Here's a disaster. Where would everybody go? How would we do it? Who responds here? Who goes there? And all that stuff. And then once we get an idea of that, have like a active exercise, like remember the pods, the point of distribution, where you hand out water or something. So you say, okay, on this day, we're going to do an exercise. Like we talked about at the church, you'd swing in the one road, pull up and hand water and go out the other. And then I think we had it set up that if it was inclement weather, then we went into the church farm buildings and stuff like that. So that was pretty much, it was just like 3 hours of that.
Sorry, Terry.
That's all I got.
Any others?
I don't know if I should snap my fingers, you singlish. On.
Planning Commission had a rather long meeting their last meeting, went about 3 hours. They wound up tabling the ordinance change that will allow trucks. They're gonna pick that back up in their next meeting. In their next meeting, they'll also have the subdivision ordinance. I'm assuming will pass that on to us in their next meeting. And they have several other things that subdivisions, things that really won't come to us in their next meeting, but they had a big one, a lot of public input on that last one, so. Then me and Jess met with, was Comcast, wasn't it? Comcast, they're bringing high-speed internet to every house in Erda. So it'll be there and available, fiber to every home in Erda.
So they're putting in a line, a buried line?
I did not get the impression they were gonna come down to the streets, but they'll be close.
I thought they said they were gonna have it to every rooftop by the end of next year.
Business-wise, that is a losing proposition. If that's what they want to do, go right ahead.
I think it would be great. There are a lot of people in Erda that are still on satellite or dial-up. And this will be a little bit quicker than that. And they had a lot of really good, inexpensive options, especially for those who aren't making $100,000. It was, I think, it was about $70,000 a year. If you made under $70,000, you could get very inexpensive internet. So,
Do you want to decrease now, Jennifer?
Won't live in Earth.
that's all I got.
That was Rocky Mountain Power too.
Yes, we did.
A little bit of redundancy into the valley.
They're coming in with power lines or what?
Yes, the big power line that comes from Mona down the Mormon Trail. They're going to continue it to the north end of the valley and across. They're going to put a substation in up on the Mormon Trail, just to try to make power more reliable in the valley.
Did it end up branching towards us?
Yes.
Any others? Okay, we'll move on to general comments.
My general comment, I move we adjourn.
Second, we adjourn this meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Copy. I got the. Is that railroad spike from my house? Cause I had to go through the audit. Business looking at something that
Railroad?
put in.
There's railways
Off. You can
wanting to bring the old rail line to these
Do we also have a digital copy of this?
send them.
plans.
You want me to?
Because I need to file it in the city system. We keep that digital copy of those usually ours. Files it. Yeah. Thank you. Get added.
Forgive me because I have a conditional use permit that I did for Fazio's and I forgot to bring it for you to put in the records.
Okay,
So sorry about that.
that's all right.